They say, home is where your heart feels safe, but I've learned that sometimes, home is where your heart gets broken. I remember the smell of morning coffee, the sound of slippers sliding across the hallway, the laughter of a little boy who once called me mom. That boy grew up, built a life, found a wife, and somewhere along the way, forgot that I existed before he did. It began on a Tuesday, a quiet day, the kind that pretends to be ordinary until it changes everything. He stood there in the living room, my son, Michael, his arms folded like a man delivering news he didn't want to discuss twice. Mom, he said, not meeting my eyes, we need to make some space. Space, that's what they call it now, when they take your room, your chair, your memories. His wife, Madison, stood beside him, polished smile, perfect posture, the scent of new perfume filling the air like a stranger's presence in your kitchen. She called me Mrs. Harlow, not Mom, not even Ma'am, just Mrs. Harlow, like I was the neighbor who overstayed her welcome. They'd moved in 6 months ago, said it was temporary while their new house was being renovated. I opened my doors, cooked for them, folded their laundry, kept my opinions to myself, but temporary things have a way of becoming permanent, especially when kindness is mistaken for weakness. That day, I stood by the doorway to my room, the same room I decorated with my late husband's hands, the same window I watched my son grow up through, and I listened as Madison's voice filled it. I was thinking, she said, her tone bright as polished glass, this space could be perfect for my clothes. The lighting's just amazing in here. Her clothes, my room. Michael shifted uncomfortably, looking at me as if waiting for my blessing. I gave none. I simply nodded, quietly, like a mother who knows her no won't matter anymore. That evening, I moved my few things into the garage. The air was colder there, smelled of paint and motor oil. My bed, a narrow cot pushed against the wall, creaked with every breath I took. I placed a small lamp beside it, one that flickered more than it glowed. And for the first time in my own house, I felt like a guest. At night, I could hear them laughing upstairs, Madison's heels clicking across the wooden floor, drawers opening and closing, the sound of my room being claimed by someone else's comfort. Sometimes, I'd hear Michael's voice through the vent. Mom's fine, he'd say. She likes the quiet down there. The quiet, yes. The quiet where even your memories don't visit. Days turned into weeks. They barely came down to check on me, except when Madison needed something, an iron, a needle, a recipe. I'd smile and give her whatever she asked for, though my hands shook sometimes. One afternoon, I found one of my husband's old shirts, still faintly smelling of cedar and soap, folded in a box, labeled Donate. It broke something inside me, but I said nothing. That night, I wrote a letter, not to them, to myself, a reminder of who I used to be. You are not invisible. You built this home with love. You raised him to be kind, even if he forgot how. Every day after that, I watched the way Madison spoke to him, soft and sweet in public, sharp and demanding when no one was listening. I noticed the way Michael's eyes grew tired, the way he sometimes lingered near the garage door, as if he wanted to say something, but didn't. He didn't. He just left the keys on the counter and drove away, same as always, and I stayed, because mothers do. But something changed in me during those nights in the garage. Maybe it was the cold, or the silence, or the way dust settled on everything I once loved. Maybe it was the memory of my husband's voice, whispering, don't let them take your peace. I started noticing things Madison didn't think I would. Receipts left on the table, luxury stores, hotel stays, whispered phone calls when Michael was at work, photos on her laptop that disappeared as soon as I entered the room. I said nothing, not because I was afraid, but because I had started to remember the kind of strength that doesn't shout. I began writing again, small notes, dates, details, a quiet collection of truths waiting to be seen. And one night, when the rain hit the roof hard enough to drown the world outside, I whispered to myself, not in anger, but in calm, deliberate resolve. They took my room, but they forgot who taught them how to build a home. That was the night everything began, not with rage, not with revenge, but with the kind of silence that only a mother can turn into power. Slow pause, you see. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with shouting or fire. It starts with patience, and the smallest act of remembering who you were before they made you forget. I used to believe that people changed slowly, like seasons, shifting leaf by leaf, but sometimes, they change overnight. You go to bed thinking you know your child, and wake up realizing you're just a story he doesn't tell anymore. The garage had become my world, a place where silence hummed louder than music. Every morning, I'd hear Madison walking above me, her heels tapping to a rhythm that wasn't kindness. Every sound reminded me that I didn't belong anymore, not even in the home I built brick by brick with my husband's hands. But pain does something interesting to people. It teaches you to listen differently. I started noticing details: the car that showed up every Thursday afternoon when Michael was still at work, the faint smell of a man's cologne lingering near the front door, the quiet buzz of her phone lighting up with a name she quickly turned face down. And yet, she smiled at dinner like nothing was wrong, that kind of smile that hides things. Practiced, polished, dangerous. I didn't say anything. I just watched, because I'd learned something in that garage, that truth, once you see it, doesn't need to be rushed. It just needs to be witnessed. One evening, I walked into the house to wash my hands before dinner. Madison was upstairs, talking on her phone. Her voice was soft, too soft. "No, he has no idea," she said, laughing quietly. "I told him Mom's staying in the garage because she likes her space, likes her space." I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not yet. Awakening. I went back to the garage and sat in the dark for a long time. Outside, the wind moved the trees, the way time moves, people bending them, until they learned to stand different. That night, I made a decision, not out of hate, but because love, real love, deserves the truth. Even if it hurts, I began to plan quietly. Every Friday, I cleaned the kitchen when Madison went to her Pilates class. That's when her phone was left charging on the counter. One day, I opened it, just once. There they were, messages, photos, hotel receipts, proof of betrayal, lined up like soldiers ready to march toward heartbreak. I didn't cry. Tears belong to people who still believe things can go back to how they were. I was past that. I printed everything slowly, carefully, one page at a time at the library downtown. The young librarians smiled at me, thinking I was printing recipes or knitting patterns. I smiled back. When I got home, I placed the folder in an old cookie tin, the same one that once held my husband's favorite oatmeal cookies. I hid it beneath a stack of blankets in the garage. Days went by. Madison's laughter grew louder. Michael's smile grew thinner. He was tired. I could see it, the way he rubbed his temples, the way he stared at his phone like it held answers he couldn't find. Sometimes, he'd stop by the garage. "Mom, you doing okay down here?" he'd ask. I'd smile and say, "Of course, sweetheart," and he'd nod, believing me, because that's what sons do. They believe the mothers they've stopped listening to. But I could see the confusion behind his eyes. He was starting to feel it, the quiet imbalance, the unease that truth brings when it's close enough to breathe on your neck. Then came the day. I knew everything would change. It was a Sunday morning. Madison left early, saying she was meeting a friend for brunch. Michael was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, distracted. That's when I walked in with 2 mugs of coffee, his favorite, with cinnamon and cream. He looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to." "I know," I said softly, "but I wanted to." We sat together in silence for a while, sipping the coffee that filled the space with warmth we both had forgotten. Then I asked, "Michael, do you remember when your father passed? What you said to me?" He frowned, trying to recall. "You said, 'I'll always take care of you. Mom, you'll never have to worry about anything again.'" He looked down, his face heavy with something that wasn't guilt yet, but close. "I meant it," he said quietly. I nodded. "I know you did." And then I smiled, not with anger, but with a softness that only mothers can fake so perfectly, because I had already decided how this story would end. That night, I took the cookie tin out from under the blankets. I opened it one last time, looked at every printed lie, and whispered, "This isn't revenge. This is remembering who you raised." I slipped the folder into Michael's briefcase the next morning before he left for work. He didn't notice. He just kissed my forehead, something he hadn't done in years, and drove off. By noon, the world I'd been forced to live under began to shake. Madison called first. Her voice was trembling, pretending to be calm. "Mrs. Harlow, have you seen Michael?" I said no. She hung up quickly. Then, silence. Hours of it. When he came home that evening, his face was pale, his eyes hollow. He didn't speak. He just walked past me, up the stairs, into her room, my room. And I heard the sound of drawers slamming, hangers falling, voices breaking. For once, I didn't feel small. For once, the house was mine again, not in possession, but in spirit. But I wasn't done, because revenge, when it's quiet, takes its time. and what I had in mind next wasn't about punishment. It was about freedom, his and mine. Slow pause, they took my room, but I had taken back the truth, and truth, once it's free, can never be sent back to the garage. People think revenge is fire, but real revenge is air. It doesn't burn. It breathes quietly until the one who ignored it finally feels the cold dot. After that night, the house changed. Not in ways you could see, but in ways you could feel. The laughter upstairs stopped. The perfume faded. Madison moved through the hallway like a ghost who had forgotten her own name. Michael didn't speak much either. He looked older, heavier, like a man trying to rebuild something with pieces he no longer recognized. For days, they barely spoke to me. Not because of anger, because of silence. The kind that guilt brings when it knows it's been seen. I kept doing what I'd always done. Cooked breakfast, folded laundry, watered the plants no one else remembered to care for. But inside me, something was shifting again. I realized I didn't want to stay. The garage had taught me stillness, the truth had taught me strength, and together, they'd reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I didn't need permission to exist. One morning, I woke up before sunrise. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds promise. I brewed coffee, poured it into a travel mug, and stood by the window that once looked out from my room, her closet now half empty. Madison was packing, Michael was helping, silent and distant. No shouting, no drama, just the slow unthreading of a life built on lies. She left that afternoon without a word. He watched her car disappear down the street, hands in his pockets, shoulders low. For a long moment, I almost reached for him. Almost, but I stopped, because some lessons need to echo before they're heard. That evening, he came to the garage. "Mom," he said softly, standing in the doorway like a boy again. "I'm sorry. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't." But I looked at him, the son I had raised, the man who'd forgotten, then remembered, and I felt the quiet weight of forgiveness settle somewhere between us. "Michael," I said, my voice calm, "I built this house so you'd always have a place to come home to. I just didn't think I'd have to remind you that it was my home too." He nodded, eyes glassy. "I was stupid," he whispered. "I thought I was helping. I thought she just needed space." "And what did I need?" I asked. He didn't have an answer. Sometimes silence is the most honest apology there is. He offered to move me back into my room, to make things right again. But right had already changed meaning for me. "No," I said gently, "I'm leaving." He looked stunned. "Leaving? Where?" I smiled. "Anywhere that's mine again." A week later, I packed 2 suitcases, one with clothes, one with memories. The rest I left behind: the furniture, the photographs, the weight of years that didn't belong to me anymore. Before I left, I walked through each room one last time. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cinnamon. The living room still held the imprint of laughter. And my old room, the one that had been taken, then emptied, stood bare again. I touched the wall, tracing the spot where my husband's picture once hung. It felt different now. Not sad, just done. I left a note on Michael's nightstand. "My darling boy, you can't give away what you didn't build, and you can't lose what never belonged to you. The house will stand, but what matters most is what you do inside it. Love, Mom." Then I walked out. No grand farewell, no last look, just the sound of the front door closing softly behind me. The way peace closes a wound. I rented a small place 2 towns over, a porch, a rocking chair, a garden patch, big enough for marigolds. Some nights, I sit outside with a cup of tea and watch the sun melt into the horizon, and I think about him, my son, about how sometimes, losing everything is the only way people learn what everything truly was. He visits now and then, brings flowers, groceries, guilt, but also laughter slowly finding its way back. He tells me about work, about therapy, about learning to cook, and I listen, not as the mother in the garage anymore, but as the woman who finally came home to herself. Sometimes, he says, "Mom, I still don't understand how you forgave me." And I smile, watching the wind move through the marigolds, because forgiveness, I tell him, isn't a gift for the other person. It's the key that unlocks your own cage. He doesn't always get it, not yet, but one day he will. Soft fade, voice lowers. They took my room, and I took my peace. I left behind walls, but I carried the silence that taught me strength. I left behind the garage, but I kept the light that never went out. And maybe that's the quietest kind of revenge there is, not the one that hurts them, but the one that heals you. Long pause, because in the end, I didn't just leave the house, I left the version of me who waited for someone else to see her worth. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. Asterisk.